There's a specific kind of pain that comes from watching someone you love choose their comfort over your dignity. I learned that lesson on a Tuesday night in front of 200 people who believed kindness was optional and cruelty was entertaining. What they didn't know was that the woman they humiliated wasn't who they thought she was, and by morning, their entire world would be different. My hands were shaking when I walked into that ballroom. Not because I was nervous about the event itself, but because something in my gut told me I was walking into a test I hadn't studied for. The chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors. Women in designer gowns moved like they owned the air they breathed. Men in tailored suits spoke in the language of mergers and acquisitions. And I stood there in a dress I'd bought on sale, holding on to my boyfriend's arm like it was a life raft. Brandon squeezed my hand once and said, "You'll be fine. Just smile." But his voice carried something I'd never heard before. Doubt. Like he wasn't sure I belonged there either. That should have been my first warning. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Sarah, and for the past year, I'd been living a life that felt like mine for the first time. I grew up as Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Robert Mitchell, the man who built Mitchell Technologies from a garage startup into a Fortune 500 company. By the time I was 16, I couldn't tell who liked me and who liked my last name. Every friendship felt transactional. Every relationship came with an asterisk. So when I turned 24, I made a decision that horrified my parents. I took my mother's maiden name, Chen. I moved out of the family estate into a small apartment in Brooklyn. I got a job at a design firm where nobody knew who my father was, and for the first time in my life, people looked at me before they looked at my bank account. That's where I met Brandon. He was a junior analyst at an investment firm. Charming, attentive, the kind of man who remembered small details. On our third date, he asked about my family, and I told him the truth, but not the whole truth. I said my parents were comfortable and we were close, but I valued my independence. He seemed to respect that. 6 months later, he told me he loved me. 3 months after that, he invited me to meet his mother at her annual charity gala. The Drake Hotel ballroom was exactly what I expected. Excess, wrapped in elegance. Ice sculptures that would melt before midnight. Champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. Brandon's mother, Patricia Montgomery, stood near the entrance in a gown that probably required its own insurance policy. She had the kind of beauty that came from excellent surgeons and brutal discipline. When Brandon introduced us, her smile never reached her eyes. She looked at me the way you'd examine a stain on expensive fabric. Disappointed. Fixable. Temporary. "Sarah Chen," she repeated, like she was testing the weight of it. "And what do your parents do?" It was a trap disguised as small talk. I'd heard that question 1,000 times before. My father works in technology. My mother is involved in philanthropy. All technically true. Patricia's smile tightened. "How lovely. And you work in graphic design," Brandon mentioned. The way she said graphic design made it sound like I collected garbage for a living. I nodded. She patted my arm with 2 fingers like I might be contagious. "Well, we appreciate all contributions to society, don't we?" Then she walked away, and Brandon pretended not to notice the insult. The next 2 hours were an exercise in subtle cruelty. Patricia introduced me to her friends with phrases designed to diminish. "This is Sarah. She's Brandon's little project." Or, "Sarah works in arts and crafts, isn't that charming?" Each introduction came with a look, a whisper, a laugh that cut like glass. Brandon stayed close, but quiet. He laughed when they laughed. He nodded when they spoke. He never once said, "That's not fair," or "Stop," or "She's important to me." His silence was its own language, and I was fluent. Then Patricia's daughter, Brandon's sister Claire, joined the performance. She was 26, newly engaged to a hedge fund manager, and she treated kindness like a limited resource. She looked at my dress and said, loudly enough for others to hear, "I love how confident you are, wearing something so simple to an event like this. I could never pull that off." Her friends giggled. Phones appeared. I realized I was being recorded. This wasn't just exclusion anymore. This was entertainment. Patricia returned with a glass of champagne in one hand and cruelty in the other. "You know, Sarah, I'd been thinking about you and Brandon. Relationships are about compatibility, aren't they? Shared values. Similar backgrounds. My son has a brilliant future ahead of him. He'll be managing significant family assets soon. He needs a partner who understands that world, who was raised in it." Her meaning was clear. I wasn't that partner. I waited for Brandon to say something. Anything. He stared at his shoes. Then Patricia did something I'll never forget. She reached out and touched the fabric of my dress, rubbing it between her fingers like she was evaluating merchandise. "Polyester blend?" she asked. "How practical." That's when Claire laughed and said, Maybe we should take up a collection. Help the poor girl buy something appropriate for next time. The circle around us erupted in laughter. And then Claire, emboldened by her mother's approval and her friends' phones, did something unforgivable. She grabbed the shoulder of my dress and pulled. The fabric tore. Not completely, but enough. Enough that everyone heard it. Enough that I felt it. Enough that the room went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before the laughter started again. Louder this time. Meaner. Patricia didn't stop her daughter. She smiled. Brandon finally spoke, not to defend me, to apologize to his mother. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have prepared her better." That's when something inside me went cold and clear. I'd spent a year trying to be seen for who I was, not what I had. And here I was, being judged for exactly that, for not having enough, for not being enough. I looked at Brandon, really looked at him, and I saw a man who'd never once had to be brave because he'd never once been challenged. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. The deep rhythmic pulse of helicopter rotors cutting through the night air, getting closer. The ballroom had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the hotel's private rooftop helipad. Everyone turned. A sleek black helicopter was landing and hotel security was already moving, which meant whoever was arriving had cleared this in advance. The doors opened. My father stepped out first, followed by his head of security. Robert Mitchell didn't need to announce himself. 30 years of building empires teaches you how to command a room just by entering it. He walked through the ballroom doors, and the entire space went silent. Not polite silent, terrified silent. Patricia's face drained of color. Claire stopped laughing mid-breath. Brandon looked like he might be sick. My father's eyes found mine immediately. He took in the torn dress, the circle of phones, the faces of people who'd forgotten what shame felt like. Then he looked at Patricia. "Mrs. Montgomery, I believe you've met my daughter. I didn't let my father destroy them. I did that myself." I walked to the center of the room and I spoke calmly. "I came here tonight as Sarah Chen because I wanted to know what kind of man Brandon really was. Whether he'd stand beside me when I had nothing to offer but myself. Whether his love was conditional on wealth and status. Thank you all for answering that question." I turned to Brandon. "You had 100 chances to choose me. You chose silence every time." Then I walked out, my father beside me, leaving behind a room full of people who just learned that cruelty has consequences and assumptions can cost everything. 3 days later, Brandon called. 47 times. I never answered. His mother sent an apology letter written by a lawyer. I sent it back unopened. The gossip spread fast. Patricia's charity lost major donors. Brandon's firm quietly suggested he consider other opportunities. None of it brought me satisfaction. What brought me peace was simpler. I learned that the right person doesn't need you to be powerless to love you. They don't need you to be powerful either. They just need you to be you. And I learned that silence, in the end, always speaks the loudest. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken? Have you ever watched someone you love choose comfort over courage? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you that dignity isn't about what you have but who you are, subscribe for more stories about the quiet strength it takes to walk away from people who make you smaller. Because some lessons hurt, but they also set you free.